Hi everyone, it's Emily, and today I want to talk about the PS Vita, specifically whether or not I think it's still worth collecting for in 2024. Now, before someone goes down in the comments and types in emulation, I'm well aware that the PS Vita is a great device to mod and emulate off of. In fact, the first PS Vita I owned, this slim model here, I've modded, and I think it's a really great device to travel with, and I have a lot of not only PS Vita games on here, but also some PSP and PSX games as well. But as someone who also enjoys collecting for physical media, I do have the OLED model here that I use exclusively for my physical titles. And I'm actually relatively late to the physical collecting scene for the PS Vita, so I have this stack of games that I've accumulated over the last couple of years, along with some Japanese titles, specifically these two Trails box sets that I'm not going to take down, that I also have in my collection. So for this video, I'm going to go over the games that are currently in my collection and whether or not I recommend others to try to hunt down physical copies if they don't already own them. And I also want to get into what games I think may not be so advantageous to collect for on the PS Vita. Now, anyone who wants to collect any game on the PS Vita, I think is great. However, we've just seen a lot of enhanced ports over the years, especially to the Switch or even PC, that are kind of improved versions of what was released initially on the PS Vita. So I wanted to mention a few of those titles as well, just for anyone else who also collects for other systems where they might find perhaps the best version of a physical game. So for those who've been following me for a little bit, I am a really big JRPG and visual novel collector. So that's primarily the titles that I have in my PS Vita collection at the moment. There are a few titles that I would like to add to this collection, which I'll mention towards the end of this video. But I'm pretty happy with the titles I've secured so far. So first I'm going to go over the JRPGs that are currently in my Vita collection. Starting with what's used to be, I guess, considered the golden child of the PS Vita is Persona 4 Golden. Now, many years after Persona 4 Golden was released on the PS Vita, we now have enhanced ports not only on PC, but also on various modern consoles such as the Switch, the PS4, and Xbox. So I don't think owning Persona 4 Golden on the PS Vita is a necessity nowadays, because there are so many other options. So despite this being available on other systems, I think the PS Vita version for Persona 4 Golden is still a really good option. And now that we have these other ports on modern systems, the price for the Vita version has actually gone down, so it's more closer to MSRP. So it's still very much attainable nowadays. And the modern physical prints that were released through limited run games have yet of this video been released in the wild. I think it's supposed to start shipping after the end of March. So once those are out in the wild, because I'm sure a lot of people have scooped up multiple copies, and retailers like Video Games Plus probably have a surplus as well, you might even see the price for the Vita version go down even more. Next is a game that I recently beat on the PS Vita, and that is Odin Sphere. And this is another title that does have a PS4 option, but if you want a handheld option, I think the PS Vita version is still a pretty good one to go for, even though this version is slightly more expensive than the PS4 version, which has seen multiple reprints at this point. And something that's going to be, I think, a common theme throughout this video is whenever there's a game that is also available on the PS4 or the PS5, the PS Portal is a good way to play these games on handheld devices, depending on how well your Wi-Fi connection is. And if you don't own a Portal, there are also other options to stream these games on a handheld device, either on your phone or through one of the PC handhelds like a Steam Deck. So you don't necessarily need to fork out a lot of money to be able to play this on a handheld device. So it does come down to whether or not you want to kind of pay the high price for the PS Vita version for this game or look into some alternative options. And honestly, I think this is probably going to get a Switch port at some point, or at least for Nintendo's next console. So I think there'll be more options for this very popular game in the future. Next, we have another Atlas title, and that is Lost Dimension. And this also received a PS3 version of the game, which kind of runs, I think, a little bit better than this one. I did play this on the PS Vita, and I would say the loading times were not the best, and it did have a few issues when it came to, I think, the music and sound just kind of cutting off randomly. But I really enjoyed this real-time strategy RPG. I would say with the build-up in the story, the ending wasn't as satisfying as I would have liked, but I still think this is a good game. This is, again, going to be a little bit pricey, I think, on the Vita at this point, because it has limited options of where you could find it available. But this is a game that regularly goes on sale very cheaply on Steam, so you have that option. Unlike with some of the Vanillaware titles that are not available on Steam, this is an Atlas title that you can get elsewhere and not have to fork over a lot of money for the physical PS Vita or even the PS3 version. Next is one that I kind of bought impulsively on the PS Vita, and that is because it was a game that was getting delisted from the publisher, and that is The Lost Child. So this is a dungeon crawler that has had rather mixed reviews. I hear it's okay, but not the best of the genre. And this was definitely a FOMO purchase for me. And it is available on other systems. Again, you just can't buy it on any digital storefronts or find this really new at retailers. This is also available on other platforms, but unfortunately those are also going to be very expensive. I think maybe even more so. I want to say the Vita version was one of the cheaper options, at least at the time I was looking. The Switch version I think is definitely one of the more expensive Switch games you could find nowadays. Again, this is not necessarily a game I would recommend because of the mixed reviews. But if you're a collector of JRPGs and just really like picking up NIS America titles, you might want to try to find this out in the wild. Again, I think either the PS4 version or the Vita version will be one of the cheaper ones. Now we're going to get into some of the games that are more exclusive on the PS Vita, starting with Mirror Rebirth. So this was originally on the Wii, but this is an enhanced port of that version. I want to say there's some exclusive content in the Vita version and also has a better translation from my understanding. So if you really enjoy 2D action side scrollers like Odin Sphere, this is definitely a must get. However, I think we might see a Switch port of this down the line. And this is because the publisher Access has been porting a lot of games that used to be just exclusive on the PS Vita or the PS4 onto the Switch. So don't be surprised if we see a new announcement within the next year or two of this also getting some sort of port down the line. Now, I don't think Mirror Rebirth is going to see as much of an enhanced port if it does come to the Switch or another console in the next couple of years, like, for example, Tokyo Xanadu, which is getting a Switch port this summer. That one apparently is getting a whole overhaul of its translation, and I think because Rebirth on the Vita already had that treatment, it's probably just going to be a straight one-to-one port, would be my prediction. So if you're able to find this game for a price you're willing to pay, I would say jump on it because I think this is a great JRPG to add to your Vita collection. But if you want to wait and maybe get this on another console, I think that's also a good option to consider. And then the last JRPG I have in my collection is Tales of Heart R, and this is another exclusive game that we got in North America on the PS Vita. So I can't really speak how well this game plays or how the Tales games in general play because I have a few in my collection, but I've yet to experience them. But I've heard really good things about Tales of Heart R in particular. So I think if you're able to find this game for a reasonable price, this might be one to consider prioritizing because I don't really think Bandai Namco is going to port this to a modern system anytime soon. There are so many ports that they've yet to do that just seem like no-brainers, such as the Xenosaga and some other games. So I wouldn't hold my breath that this will happen anytime soon. So this might be something, again, to prioritize on the Vita, in my opinion. Then quickly, I'm going to highlight Bastion here on the PS Vita. This was through Limited Run Games, and I think this has a good chance of maybe getting a Switch port down the line, but it depends on Limited Run Games' relationship with Supergiant Games. And I think after Supergiant Games made just a huge splash with Hades, they're probably going to be printing their own games moving forward and not using Limited Run. And so if that were the case, I'm not really sure how they would want to go about porting a physical release of Bastion onto modern systems. So the easiest might be to try to go through Limited Run Games again, because I think they want to focus on Hades 2 and their future titles moving forward. But again, it's hard to know. I got this relatively recently, and it wasn't very much. I think it was under $50, and I had some coupons. So you can find deals for some limited run games. I think because there's just so many limited run games nowadays in circulation, some of the prices, especially for some of the Vita titles, have been, I think, going down a bit, especially in this economy. So if there's one that you really want, it might be something to consider just looking out for. But again, I don't think these are necessarily games to prioritize, because I think the popular games that they published will probably get ports down the line on other systems. We've seen this with so many games over the years. For example, specifically for the PS Vita, we've seen this with Valhalla getting Switch ports, not only through limited run games, but also through Asian English versions. Another one is the House of Fata Morgana, was originally released on the Vita, and then a few years later got a Switch port. So it's not out of the question that a lot of the games that were handled by Limited Run Games on the Vita might eventually get Switch or other system releases. Next, I want to talk about games that were handled through the Sony Studios specifically. So I do have Tearaway for the PS Vita, and a lot of the Sony Studio games were printed in mass, and so they're relatively easy to find rather cheaply. So most of them I think you could find for $35 or less. This one I think I only paid, I want to say around $20 or less. So there are a lot of games that fall in this category that I still need to pick up for my collection. I just haven't prioritized them yet because you can find them rather easily and they are on the cheaper side. So I just kind of been pushing them off a little bit. Some examples of these are Little Big Planet for the PS Vita, as well as Uncharted, The Golden Abyss. I think those are two titles that I definitely want to have in my collection down the line, and they are not going to break the bank. At least not at this point. But unlike those two titles I just mentioned, Tearaway also has a PS4 version. However, what's really cool about the PS Vita version is that it does utilize the touchpad and some of the other features that are unique to the PS Vita. So if you want kind of the full experience, I think getting this on the PS Vita is the way to go rather than on the PS4. And if you want to play those on handheld through a streaming device, you're really not going to get the same experience as playing it on the PS Vita. So out of all the PS Vita games that I'll be talking about today, I do think that the Sony Studio games are ones not to miss out on. Not only because they're rather common and fairly cheap, but they really utilize the Vita for what it was, and you're not going to get that on a lot of the third-party games, unfortunately. Now, everything else I'm going to be covering are visual novels, and I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, so I'll go through these rather quickly, but still share some of my opinions and I guess insight of how I would collect these if I were to start over today. So I'm going to start with the visual novel that I think will be the easiest to pick up for probably the cheapest, and that is Steins Gate. So this is an epic sci-fi tale that is not only a really good visual novel, it also was adapted to an excellent anime if you haven't seen it yet. And it's one that I do recommend if you are a fan of this genre to look into. And so this version of Steins Gate you can pick up elsewhere, including the PS4 for rather cheaply. But the Vita games, from what I could tell, are still on the cheaper end, so still very much attainable on this system. Now, Steins Gate can get a little confusing of which version is which, because there are a few different ones that have been released on consoles. So don't get this version confused with Steins Gate Elite, which is available on the Switch and the PS4. That, from what I could tell, is considered an inferior version of the first Steins Gate here, and it has a lot of the anime cutscenes inserted in that were a little bit unnecessary. So I do think probably getting this on the Vita is the way to go instead of that version. And what's going to be more difficult to find is Steins Gate Zero, and I believe this is an alternative route of what happens in the first game, and so it's kind of like a sequel of sorts. So even though this is a bit more pricey than the first Steins Gate, I think if you really enjoyed the first Steins Gate, this is one to also look into if you could find it for a good price. And if you can't find it for a good price on Vita, it's also available on the PS4 for usually around the $20 range or less. So there are options. Then next in this collection, we have some rather heavy hitters in the visual novel genre, and the Nornary games includes two games, 999, which was originally released on the Nintendo DS back in the day, as well as Virtue's Last Reward, which also saw a 3DS version of. I've heard from many fans of the series that the Vita versions are not necessarily the best versions to play, even though this does have better graphics. Because you don't have the dual screens, some of the puzzles are not as satisfying to complete, is my understanding. So that is something to keep in mind if you also collect for the Nintendo DS or 3DS. But I personally decided to go for the PS Vita version of these, even though it is considered the inferior version in a way, just because I do rather enjoy the graphical enhancements, and I really do enjoy visual novels on the Vita. I do think it's one of the best handhelds you could play and read visual novels from. And then the third game is also available on the PS Vita, but in a separate package, and that is Zero Time Dilemma. Now, this game is a little bit more difficult to find than the Nornary games, I believe. It's definitely difficult to find on the 3DS. I think that one's really shot up in price last time I checked. So it might be a little bit more cost effective to find on the Vita or the PS4. So definitely, I think, hunt around and see kind of what system you really want to focus on for these. Because these are excellent visual novels and are definitely some of people's like top favorites and ones not to miss. And then the last ones I want to go over are Move Love and Move Love Alternative. And these are also highly regarded visual novels that I've yet to play, but I'm excited to get to sometime soon. And from my understanding is you really need the background of the first game to really get the satisfying enjoyment out of the second game here. And what's interesting is that this is also getting a Switch port. However, it's going to be an Asian exclusive. I believe it's going to have English in it, but you can only buy these, I think, in a really expensive collector's edition. So it might be cheaper to go the Vita route on those. However, maybe down the line, there'll be a cheaper Switch or some other sort of handheld alternative. But for now, I think if you wanted to experience these games, I think the Vita versions are a good way to go. And then lastly, I'm going to touch on some Otome visual novels that I have in my collection. And so these are romance visual novels that are more geared towards a female audience. But I'm going to talk about these two, Psychedelica of the Black Butterfly and Psychedelica of the Ashen Hawk. And right now, I think you could only play these on the PS Vita. These are also published by Axis, so it's possible these might get ports down the line on other systems, but they can be rather pricey if you're in the market for Otome visual novels. Sometimes you could catch a deal, but I have seen these for outrageous prices. So definitely be careful on that front if these interest you. But these are kind of a more dark, moody, atmospheric visual novel in the Otome genre. And so far I've just played The Black Butterfly, which I really enjoyed. And I've also heard good things about the Ashen Hawk. So I'll get to that at some point. And then next I have Seven Scarlet here, which Axis recently announced a Switch port of. I don't know if it's going to be an enhanced port. I haven't looked at the details yet, but a lot of the Axis's ports to Switch seem to all be some sort of enhancement. When they did Norn 9, I actually did own the Vita version of that, but decided to sell it in favor of picking up the Switch release because apparently that has better translations, was what I was told. And also has a fan disc for that available on the Switch. So whenever I can, I try to get the same series on the same system because it's kind of weird, especially on the shelf when they're kind of separated. And in a similar vein, I also have the first game for Hakuyoki, Kyoto Winds. This also is getting an enhanced port, along with its sequel that was released on the Vita, Edo Blossoms, I believe it's called. And that's going to be in a nice package on one physical cart on the Switch through PlayAsia. So I'm most likely going to be selling this version because I've already pre-ordered the Switch collector's edition that I'm really excited for. And the Switch version also apparently has some exclusive content that I didn't want to miss out on. So this seems to be kind of the theme for a lot of these games that used to be on the Vita, especially visual novels, getting enhanced ports, either with better translations or exclusive content. So it might make sense in 2024 to pick them up on the Switch or another system, rather than go back and try to potentially buy this more expensive Vita version. But yes, that is my entire collection of my North American Vita games. There are some games you can import that I know some people really enjoy doing. I haven't really imported many games for my collection because for the Vita, I want to say most, if not all, do not have English subtitles for their Japanese versions, which is a shame because the Vita was great in Japan and they have so many exclusive games over there. But even games over there that do not include English subtitles, such as the rhythm games, a lot of people like to still import those and play them because you don't necessarily need subtitles in order to play those successfully. And I did mention at the start of this video that I do have the two collector's boxes for Trails in the Sky FC and Second Chapter, the Evolution versions. I decided to pick these up on the Vita, not only because they're nice box sets that we never got over here, but the Evo versions on the Vita, it's really the way to play the Trails in the Sky games at this time. I'm still hoping Falcom will release either Switch versions or some enhanced version down the line on some modern system, but I think the chance of that is high, but who knows when that's going to happen in their timeline and when it eventually gets over here. So those are all the games that are currently in my PS Vita collection, and I'm rather pleased with how it's shaped up, and I do think that I'm mostly almost done collecting for the PS Vita. And I picked up most of the games that I really want in my collection. So there are a couple games that I'm still on the lookout for. I mentioned how I still want to get Uncharted: The Golden Abyss, as well as Little Big Planet. But for some other games that I haven't mentioned yet, I also want to get Gravity Rush for the PS Vita, because it was a game that was originally built on the PS Vita, and I think just how the controls would work on that handheld would be really cool. And I might try to double dip and get the PS4 version as well, which I know is expensive. It's hard to find that under $80 right now. But the reason why I'm considering this is because the PS4 version is a remaster that has the DLC on the disc, and I do value having a complete disc in my collection when it comes to physical media. But that said, it's rather easy to get Gravity Rush on the Vita rather cheaply, so I think that's probably the route I'm going to go, because I do want to experience the cool controls that were only offered on the Vita version. There are a few other JRPGs that I'm also considering, but they're very low priority because I hear they're not that great of games. This includes Exist Archive, which is also available on the PS4, so I might just pick it up there, but it might be cool just to have on the handheld device. And there's also Dungeon Travelers 2, which I know leans more towards kind of a lewd dungeon crawler game, and I think the first one just received a Steam port of sorts, so it's possible they might also bring the second one on Steam somehow past all their censors. I do hear that's actually a pretty good game, but I'm not really the biggest dungeon crawler fan as of yet, so that's why, again, it's kind of a lower priority for me. There are also a few visual novels I want to get as well. They're mostly in the Otome genre, so I have so many Otome visual novels that I haven't played yet, so that's kind of why that's also been a lower priority for me when it comes to collecting, because I do want to finish up more before I buy more. But the titles I've been considering that it's possible they might get Switch ports down the line, so something definitely to, I think, keep an eye on, is Period Cube, as well as the Bad Apple Wars, which I think is actually exclusive right now on the PS Vita. So that might be one I might prioritize because I think it was only sold through GameStop for a limited time. So that one's a little bit more difficult to get your hands on. I also want to get the 3 Code Realize games, and I need to do a little bit more research whether or not the Switch versions that they received semi-recently were enhanced ports or not. So I might just end up getting the Switch versions down the line if that is the case. There are also a lot of good Vita games that are in other genres that I haven't talked about because I just don't collect them. I do know there are quite a number of more action shooting games. For example, I think there's a Killzone Mercenaries game that's supposed to be pretty good on the Vita. Freedom Wars on the Vita is also supposed to be really good, even though I think they shut the servers down, so it's not as good as it used to be, but it's still, I think maybe the solo campaign might be worth still picking up for. I'm not 100% positive on that. There's a lot of racing games too that I don't know anything about. I think there's some Wipeout games and whatnot. So I'm not sure if those are also available on other platforms, but they might be good games to look into on the PS Vita. But when I first started collecting for the PS Vita, I always regarded it as a JRPG machine. And unfortunately, it just seems like fewer games are kind of exclusive to the Vita right now. In some ways, this may be a good thing because them not being exclusive to the platform means they are on the cheaper end when it comes to older JRPGs. For example, Ys Memories of Celceta is rather cheap because it did get an enhanced PS4 version down the line. And I already mentioned Tokyo Xanadu is also getting an enhanced Switch port very soon. So I'm sure that will also decrease in value and be a little bit easier to pick up on the Vita itself. So in conclusion, I think the PS Vita is still worth collecting for in 2024. We just have to be a little bit more conscious of what titles we want to go for, because some of them might have better versions elsewhere for other consoles we might also be collecting for. So I just kind of wanted to make this video to reflect on the state of, I guess, PS Vita collecting for physical media collectors, and also sort of just highlight that a lot of the great games that used to be just exclusive on the PS Vita, we now have so many more options nowadays. So I guess one of the messages I wanted to share in this video is that if you don't already own a PS Vita, it's not the end of the world that you missed out on the system. I think it's still a wonderful device to collect for, even today, and there's so many great titles you could experience on it. And if you don't necessarily want to collect physical editions like I have been doing, I still think it's a great option for emulation and modding scene. They made it so much easier to do now than I think when I started modding mine back in 2018 or so. But so many of these games that used to be exclusively on the Vita as handheld versions are now seeing other options, which I think is great. It just makes, I think, the collecting scene a little bit easier on all of our wallets, and just gives us a lot more options, so we can really customize what sort of collection we want to curate down the line. So I hope this video was helpful for some of you looking into collecting or expanding your PS Vita collections. And let me know what some of your favorite titles on the PS Vita are, especially if it's one that I didn't cover in this video. Because I was a rather late adopter to the PS Vita, I'm sure there are plenty of titles that I missed out on, so I'd love to hear what some of your favorites are. And until my next video, bye guys.